Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really going under the hood, looking at the foundational ideas behind one of the most, influential blueprints for personal change out there, the core principles of the 12 steps.
Yeah, and our goal isn't just to list the steps. We want to unpack the engine behind them.
Yeah.
The psychological stuff, the relational dynamics that actually make sustainable change possible.
Right. What makes it work? We're digging into that original template for recovery, asking what pulls someone from that deep isolation of addiction into, real connection.
And it all kicks off with this fascinating paradox, doesn't it?
It really does. The whole thing starts not with finding strength, but with total surrender. The early writings are really clear about this. The journey only begins at that point they called not godness.
That moment of shock.
Yeah, that moment where you finally realize deep down you are not the director of the show, especially when it comes to the substance. You're not in control.
Exactly. And our sources for this, we've got a whole stack of the key writings, some historical records, personal accounts. They all show how this shift from thinking you're in control to this radical kind of humility becomes the bedrock.
The absolute foundation for a recovered life. So we'll explore the steps, the traditions that support the fellowship, and maybe most importantly, this incredibly powerful, simple thing, identification. One person just seeing themselves in another.
That's the heart of it.
Okay, let's dive in. Where does it all begin? The condition itself and that moment of collapse that starts everything. So the sources, they pretty quickly move past the kind of public image, the stereotype of an alcoholic. The picture they paint is much broader, much more insidious. It cuts across all parts of society.
Right. And the problem isn't just drinking too much. For the alcoholic described here, drinking becomes an obsession, yes, but also, kind of strangely, an ally.
An ally? How so?
Well, it acts like a shelter. A temporary escape from these really intense internal storms. The sources suggest many alcoholics are maybe hypersensitive people. They feel things deeply crushing, low self-worth, this chronic, sometimes paralyzing fear, and just a total inability to cope with disappointment or failure. Alcohol offers this immediate, though obviously temporary, relief.
So it becomes their main coping tool, even as it's destroying them. They're not just running from outside pressures, but from their own internal feelings, basically hiding.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Hiding instead of facing that emotional reality. And the cost is, huge. There's this one description of the merry-go-round. It's devastating.
What's that?
It's this endless cycle, in and out of hospitals, maybe jails, or maybe worse in a way, staying sober just long enough to make some money.
To buy more alcohol.
Exactly, to get drunk again. And often, getting drunk just to switch off the anxiety, just to be able to sleep. It's like this psychological hamster wheel. It can go on for years, decades even.
And what keeps that wheel spinning is often this profound illusion of control. The denial isn't just ignoring the obvious. It's often based on these careful, kind of destructive comparisons.
Right, they'll say, well, my drinking isn't as bad as that person's. Or they focus on, keeping up appearances, maybe good job, to hide the internal chaos.
Yeah.
There's this one grimly funny story in the texts. Someone passes out after 3 martinis and a couple of beers. The landlord gets worried about a fire.
Okay.
And the person's reaction is basically surprised that anyone was worried. They just frame the whole blackout episode as a genuine mistake.
Wow. That's textbook cognitive distortion, isn't it? Ignoring the key evidence of the blackout just so the self-justification can continue. They refuse to accept that once they start, they genuinely can't predict what happens next.
And that leads us right into the absolute cornerstone, the psychological prerequisite.
Yeah.
Step 1, admitting powerlessness.
Which is way more than just saying, yeah, I drink too much.
Oh, absolutely. It's this deep gut-level recognition that your own mind, your willpower, your emotional tools, they just cannot manage the substance. They're broken in that specific area.
And the sources have this really interesting angle on how not to do step 1. They argue that just blaming yourself for everything, trying to carry all the guilt, that's actually counterproductive. They call it an ego trip back into hopelessness.
That's such a key distinction. Why is blaming yourself an ego trip?
Well, think about it. If you believe you're the cause of all the failure, you're still secretly believing you should have been powerful enough to control it.
Ah, right. It keeps the self, the ego, right at the center of the problem. Even in failure, you're still the main character, just a failed one.
Exactly. So the real journey starts with what they call the absolute deflation of ego. Hitting bottom isn't just about losing your job or, getting arrested, though that often
It's
happens.
more internal.
It's defined as this shocking, painful event, maybe internal, maybe external, that fundamentally punctures that inflated ego. A moment where you finally see your own powerlessness in this area.
And right at that critical moment, that fork in the road, if the person chooses genuine humility, which is really just seeing things realistically instead of clinging to that false pride, well, that's when the door cracks open.
And that's where this shift happens from what they call willfulness to willingness.
Yeah, let's unpack that because we use those words pretty loosely sometimes. What's willfulness according to these sources?
It's described as the state of constant striving, constant conflict, driven by fear. Willfulness is trying to force outcomes, gain power over people, over life, because you're fundamentally insecure and need things to go your way.
So the addict's life before recovery is often full of manipulation, trying to get needs met, or maybe the opposite, being overly dependent on others.
Right. Either trying to run the whole show or expecting everyone else to make you happy and secure, and both trap you.
Absolutely. Because when people inevitably let you down because they're human, if you're overly dependent, it just feeds resentment, insecurity, feeling like a victim.
Which, of course, often leads right back to the substance.
So willingness, then, is the opposite. It's not about forcing, it's about alignment. It's described as saying yes to life, aligning your own will with reality, with how things are, instead of constantly fighting it.
And that's the core of step 3, right? Making that decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of a higher power, however you understand that.
Exactly. And it sounds maybe a bit abstract, but often this decision isn't made in some quiet, reflective moment. The texts are full of stories where it happens in crisis.
Like that famous story of the guy caught in a massive storm at sea.
Yeah, in the North Pacific. Total desperation, crying out, "Please, God, don't let me die like this. Get me out of this. I'll do anything." Those are moments of complete ego collapse, no bargaining left,
Just raw surrender.
and the result is this profound reversal of everything they believed before. This dependence, the thing they fought against, actually becomes their main source of strength. What looks like weakness to the outside world becomes this incredible spiritual power.
It really turns everything on its head. Dependence becomes stability.
Okay, so step 1 deflates that massive ego. Where does all that energy go? It seems like the next steps are about cleaning house, dealing with the wreckage left behind by that self-centeredness. We get to step 4, the searching and fearless moral inventory.
Right. And searching and fearless is key. This inventory is crucial because, as we said, the alcoholic has often been living behind these thick walls of self-justification, denial, rationalization.
Especially if they maintain some outward appearance of success.
Exactly. People with, decent jobs, families. They're often genuinely shocked when they finally take an honest look. They discover the flaws they denied weren't gone. They were just buried, waiting to sabotage them again.
And the sources pinpoint one major threat this inventory needs to tackle head-on: resentment. The language they use is really strong. It's called an infinitely grave risk to staying sober. Infinitely grave. Because it's seen as immediately dangerous. The texts say resentment literally shuts ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. It cuts you off from that power you found in step 3.
So it leads directly back towards futility, unhappiness, and relapse.
Precisely. The moment resentment takes root, you're in danger. And the inventory forces you to see that the harm you do to yourself by holding on to this stuff is often way worse than whatever the original offense was. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
But hang on, there's a potential pitfall here, isn't there? You deflate the ego in step 1, then dive deep into all your flaws in step 4. Couldn't that just lead to crushing guilt, paralyzing shame? How do you avoid just beating yourself up?
That's a great question, and that's exactly why step 5 is indispensable. If you did step 4 alone, yes, it could absolutely lead to despair.
So step 5 is the antidote.
It's the crucial next move. The difference between necessary humility, which is an honest assessment that allows for growth and hopeless self-flagellation, is sharing it. Step 5 is admitting to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs.
That third part, the other human being, that seems to be where the real magic happens, breaking the isolation.
It's called the saving principle. And they point out this isn't some new psychological trick.
Yeah.
The practice of confession, of sharing your burdens with another person, is ancient. It's validated by centuries of religious practice and now by psychology, too, for gaining real insight.
You have to say it out loud.
Yeah.
To someone else.
Yeah. Get it out of the echo chamber of your own head where it just festers. Speaking the truth to another person seems to neutralize its toxic power over you.
There's that powerful summary in the readings. We don't recover in isolation. We heal in relationship and in connection with other people.
That's the core insight. And the results of doing step 5 are described as profound. Losing that terrible sense of being alone, finding some real peace, some tranquility, being able to forgive yourself and others, and gaining this new honesty and realism about who you are. It prepares you for the next steps.
And this focus on relationship makes sense because the founders actually identified the root problem not as the drinking itself primarily, but as fundamentally defective relationships.
Yeah, that's a huge statement they make. They call the primary failure our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being.
Wow. How does that inability show up?
Well, it manifests as what they term egomania, but it has two seemingly opposite faces, creating these disastrous pitfalls in relationships.
Okay, what are they?
First, you've got the person who insists on dominating. They need to control people, situations, outcomes. They think they know best, driven by fear underneath.
The controller.
Right. And second, just as damaging, is the person who depends too much on others. They make constant emotional demands, expecting others to provide their security, their happiness, their validation.
So they basically outsource their well-being.
Exactly. And when people inevitably fail to meet those constant, often unspoken demands, because, again, they're human, the dependent person feels betrayed. That leads to insecurity that just grows and festers, which, of course,
Fuels resentment and often back to the bottle.
right. So the whole point of these steps, especially 4 and 5, is to start moving away from those extremes, domination or dependence, and learn how to have healthy give-and-take relationships, what they call true partnership or fellowship.
So this radical shift from being trapped alone to finding healing and connection, it wasn't just theory. It was discovered almost by accident out of sheer desperation. Let's talk about that pivotal meeting in Akron, 1935. Bill W. and Dr. Bob. This really set the pattern for everything that followed.
It really did. Bill W. was in Akron. His business deal had fallen through. He was alone in the Mayflower Hotel lobby, and he was in agony, just pacing, fighting this overwhelming urge to go to the hotel bar.
He was desperate.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he had this moment of clarity. He realized all the theories, the willpower, the religious ideas, none of it was working. What he needed right then was to talk to someone else who understood. He needed another drunk to keep himself sober.
That's incredible. So he sought out Dr. Bob, and Bob was not exactly enthusiastic at first, right?
Not at all. Bob was apparently shaking pretty badly from his own drinking, deeply skeptical. He agreed to meet, but only for 15 minutes, maybe 20 tops. He'd been through the ringer with cures, lectures, treatments. He'd heard it all.
But he stayed much longer.
He stayed for hours because the connection wasn't based on advice or cures. Bill didn't preach. He just shared his own story, his own experience with the obsession, the DTs, the self-loathing.
And Bob was hooked.
He was fascinated, the story goes, because this stranger knew. He'd been there. It was that immediate gut-level identification, the shared suffering, the shared reality that broke through Bob's defenses.
And that became the template. One alcoholic talking to another. Experience, strength, hope. Simple as that.
But maybe the clearest, most telling example of how this identification works comes from the story of the third person they helped get sober, Bill D., often called the man in the bed.
Ah, yes. His story is fascinating, especially because it almost didn't make it into the big book, the main text.
Exactly. And the reason why reveals a lot about the early days and how they were trying to shape the public perception of this new movement.
Tell us about that paradox. Why was Bill D's story problematic for them initially?
Well, Bill D. actually came from a very respectable background, upper middle class, well-educated. So on one level, he's seen perfect proof that this wasn't just for down and outers.
Right. He fit the image they wanted to project.
But his recent drinking behavior had been spectacularly messy and public, including apparently assaulting 2 nurses while drunk shortly before they met him. His credentials for being a real alcoholic were almost too obvious, too raw, too embarrassing.
So the respectability clashed with the recent, very visible, messy reality. They were trying hard to move away from the Skid Row bum stereotype.
Precisely. They wanted a more palatable image, maybe more professional. Bill D., despite being their first real success story after Bob, didn't quite fit the polished PR message they were aiming for at that exact moment.
Yet his experience, which is documented in the chapter A Vision for You, became the absolute bedrock, the model for what to do when you go see someone who's still suffering, the 12th step call.
It's the foundational story. And there's this key anecdote within it about someone who went to visit Bill D. when he was still in the hospital, in this sort of lonesome, dark room.
Okay, what happened?
Well, the visitor went, probably feeling pretty low himself, maybe expecting to need to give some kind of pep talk or argument for sobriety. But Bill D., the man in the bed, just started talking, sharing his own drinking story.
Just telling his story.
Yeah. And the visitor later said something quite remarkable. He admitted he was actually quite bored by the details of Bill D's story. He couldn't really recall the specifics of what Bill D had even said.
That's amazing. That's the absolute crux of it, isn't it? If the visitor was bored and didn't remember the words, where did the life-changing impact come from? What actually happened?
It wasn't the words, it was the person. It was the visible transformation in Bill D. The visitor said, despite being bored by the story, the effect was profound. His realization was simple. I knew I could quit because he had quit.
He saw living proof.
Living proof.
Yeah.
And crucially, he hadn't had a drink for over a year. The important thing was that he was happy. He was released, relieved from his alcoholism, and was happy and contented because of it.
Wow. So the message wasn't in the harrowing details or some clever argument. It was transmitted through Bill D's state of being, his happiness, his contentment, his evident peace.
Exactly. The state of the messenger was the message. It completely bypasses all the intellectual arguments, the denial, the self-justification we talked about earlier. You can argue with words, but you can't really argue with someone sitting in front of you who is clearly, genuinely at peace after having been where you are.
The specific war stories almost become secondary.
They do. They matter for establishing the connection, the me too, but the real power comes from the visible evidence of recovery.
So these legacies, these stories of suffering and recovery, they get passed along almost like an energy transfer. Not through formal teaching, but just through the simple, undeniable proof of a changed life. Bill D's sobriety shone through, and that was enough. Okay, so that initial connection, that identification sparks the change. But finding that peace, that contentment like Bill D showed, isn't a one-time fix. The sources are adamant that recovery needs constant upkeep, lifelong maintenance.
Absolutely. And that work starts right away with step 6, becoming entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character that were uncovered in step 4.
Entirely ready. That sounds like a tall order.
It is. It marks a shift from just seeing the problem, step 4, and admitting it, step 5, to actively wanting it gone. But there's a nuance here that texts point out.
What's that?
Perfection isn't the goal. It's about spiritual progress. You might still have some character flaws, maybe for life, but the aim is to become truly willing to let go of the ones you can, the ones causing the most trouble, focusing that willingness on just for today.
So it's about stopping the internal argument, the resistance to change, fully accepting you can't fix these deep-seated things yourself.
Exactly. The will has to be aligned with the change process, not fighting it. And this idea of continuous work, continuous willingness, is really embedded in step 10.
Which is often called the acid test of ongoing sobriety.
Right, because it requires taking that inventory process from step 4 and applying it daily, continuously checking your assets and liabilities, emotionally speaking. Are you harboring resentment, fear, dishonesty? You look at it, admit it, and try to correct it right away, like a business doing constant inventory control.
So it's about putting these principles into practice in real time, minute by minute sometimes, dealing with emotional flare-ups as they happen.
Yes, and the guidance is very practical. When you feel disturbed, angry, fearful, resentful, the instruction is to pause, ask for guidance. That simple prayer from step 3, thy will not mine be done, needs to be renewed, sometimes many times a day.
It's not just a morning ritual, it's like continuous spiritual exercise, like training for a marathon, you have to keep at it.
It really is. And this perspective leads to how they define sobriety itself, not as a cure, but as a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition.
You only get today's peace based on today's spiritual effort.
That's the idea. And the doing of that maintenance work flows directly into step 12. Here, the key word becomes action.
Doing the work.
Yes. Sobriety is maintained by actively carrying the message to others who still suffer, and by practicing these principles in all areas of life, at home, at work, financially, everywhere. It's about integration, not just showing up for meetings.
And the motivation for this action is an obligation, it seems. It's described as having a priceless reward, something very different from what they might have chased before recovery.
Totally different. The reward isn't material gain or ego stroking. It's this deep spiritual satisfaction that comes from watching other people get well, seeing them find hope, improve their lives, reconnect with their families. That's the payoff.
Service replaces self-obsession.
Exactly. That service work takes on new meaning, and crucially, it works when other activities fail. Helping someone else pulls you out of your own head like nothing else.
Okay, but this whole structure, this fellowship, it's made up of people who are, by their own admission, recovering egomaniacs. How does the organization itself avoid imploding from all that potential drama, control-seeking, and pride?
That's where the traditions come in. They are essentially the spiritual principles that guide the groups, protecting the fellowship from the very same character defects that trip up individuals.
Guardrails for the groups?
Precisely. Take Tradition 5, Singleness of Purpose. It basically says, let's stick to what we do best,
Which is?
carrying the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. The tradition advises doing one thing supremely well rather than many badly. Avoid getting tangled up in outside issues. Politics, religion, reform movements, finances. Keep the focus laser sharp on helping the next suffering person.
And then there's perhaps the most famous and maybe most misunderstood tradition. Number 12, anonymity, placing principles before personalities.
Absolutely vital, and it came directly from hard-won, painful experience in the early days.
How so?
While some early members, maybe still riding that initial wave of enthusiasm, started seeking public attention. They became minor celebrities within the movement. Yeah, the risk was obvious. Reinflation of self-pride. And worse, if one of these well-known members relapsed, it caused huge damage to the public perception of AA and could discourage others.
So anonymity isn't about secrecy. It's about humility. It's a practical application of ego deflation at the group level.
Exactly. It's the spiritual foundation ensuring that the message, the principles, are always more important than any individual member, no matter how charismatic or well-known.
Which leads to Tradition 11 too, right? Attraction rather than promotion.
Right. The idea is that AA should share its principles freely with the public, but never promote itself by capitalizing on the names or reputations of its members. Let the results, the changed lives, speak for themselves. Let people be attracted to the peace and recovery they see, just like that visitor was attracted to Bill D's contentment.
It keeps the focus on the program, not the personalities. Protects the unity and the core message.
It's all designed to preserve that simplicity and unity, ensuring humility remains central, protecting the whole thing from internal conflicts and external controversies. Unity through shared principles, not division through competing egos. Hashtag tag outro.
So when you boil it all down, it's this incredibly elegant self-correcting system, isn't it? Deflate the ego, find radical humility, break that crippling isolation through real vulnerable connection with others, and then maintain that connection, that spiritual fitness, through ongoing self-examination and active service to others who are still struggling.
Yeah, and the message, as we saw so clearly with Bill D, it isn't really preached or argued, it's just delivered. Delivered through the example of someone who has found some measure of peace and contentment.
A life transformed speaks louder than any words.
It really does. And reflecting on that, especially the story of Bill D, how people found hope simply by witnessing his happiness, his release, even if his actual story was, well, maybe not that gripping, it leaves us with something important to consider, doesn't it?
What's that final thought for you, the listener?
Well, if the most powerful part of the message you carry isn't necessarily the drama of your past, but the genuine peace and happiness you project today, how does that shift your understanding of what it means to simply share your experience in any conversation, in any part of your life? What does that look like for you?